Welcome to Everything's Not Black and White with your hosts, Lala and Brian.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to today's episode. We are so happy you are here. If this is your first time listening to us, we say welcome. And if you are returning, we say thank you. It's 2 years strong, and we are having a great time bringing new and interesting guests your way. And today's guest is no exception. She is the one and only Jocelyn Marie, because she was born in the 70s and 80s, Armstrong. We just had that conversation, y'all, because, you know, most black kids were named Marie, Renee, and what's the other one?
Nicole.
Nicole. That's so right. If their first name was Nicole, the middle name was Nicole. But Joshy and I, 5-6 years go back?
I think so,
Yeah, it's been a while. We had a mutual friend who we can't remember introduced us, and we were like, y'all need to know each other. And so we got to know each other, and we just fell madly in love with each other, and we see each other all around the city doing all the good things. And so we were excited to have her join us on the podcast today. We want to talk a little bit about what the last 2 years have been all about. So Jocelyn holds the beautiful role of Director of Inclusion and Outreach at the Ohio State Bar Association, not to be confused with the Ohio State University, because it's just the Ohio State Bar Association. Is correct?
That's
it's not
correct.
Okay, got it.
You got to clarify that when you're in the state of Ohio.
Because sometimes you have to clarify that, you know. But Jocelyn also runs a beautiful podcast called Inscribinginclusion. And so we have a lot in common in how we think about the world and how it's changing, both for the better and sometimes not at all. So we're going to have that little bit of a conversation today. So everybody, please welcome Jocelyn to the show. Jocelyn. Yay, girl. Welcome.
Thank you both for having me. This is great.
You're so welcome. So you all probably knew maybe a month ago, we were guests on Jocelyn's podcast. And so we're like, hey, we should reciprocate and come on over because we have a lot to talk about. So she so graciously said yes. And
that was
so
an easy yes. It's a really easy yes.
Well, we love having you here. So our folks want to know a little bit more about you. So who is Jocelyn Marie Armstrong?
So thank you for having me. Hello, everyone listening. I am a tried and true Midwesterner.
Yes.
I was born in Northwest Ohio and found my way to The Ohio State University. See, I've got ties to both of them.
You got it right. You did good.
And that's where I went to school, and then I went to law school at Capitol. I was always involved or engaged in some sort of diversity, equity, and inclusion, even as a kid. We didn't call it that back then in the 80s, right? But that's what I was doing. Whenever there was an opportunity for like a Black History Month report at my small Catholic school, I never wrote about Martin Luther King. We just celebrated him the other day. That's fair. But I always wrote about Barbara Jordan or Charles Drew or Duke Ellington, just somebody completely different.
Right.
Because I was already interested in what Black history meant beyond what we were taught in school. Right. Which was very limited at that point. Very limited.
Exactly.
So that's kind of how I got into this. I guess it's a lifestyle for me. Mm-hmm. And it started at a young age. I didn't start doing it professionally until after I became an attorney and was working in a bar association, and a position came open through some reorganization. And so suddenly I was in charge of diversity, equity, inclusion at a local bar association. Mm-hmm. And that was fun because I got to oversee like internship programs and annual programs. It was great.
Awesome.
And then next thing I know, I'm working at the state bar doing some of the same stuff. And truly, like you all, it's a lifestyle for me. So I do it in my 9 to 5, but I'm always reading some book or watching some documentary or participating in some panel or producing a podcast where that's what I'm talking about.
Yes. I love it. So what really got you into becoming a lawyer? So, you know, you talked about loving Black history and kind of introducing that to people at a young age, but what got you into the law side of things?
I wish it was some deep epiphany. Mm-hmm. It was not. I even wrote this in my personal statement for law school. I wanted to be like Claire Huxtable on The Cosby Show.
Right now.
And I wanted to be like Jonathan Rollins, who was played by Blair Underwood on LA Law.
Yes.
So this is what I thought, because I was like 7 or 8 years old when I told my mother, I'm going to be a lawyer. And she was like, okay. Like, we didn't have any lawyers in the family. I only saw these people on television, and I thought it looked cool. Mm-hmm. I had no idea what it really meant. Yeah. But it sounded good to my little 7, 8-year-old brain. And my mother, to her credit, just said, okay. She didn't tell me no. She didn't say we didn't have money for law school. She didn't say we don't know lawyers. She just said, okay. And the rest of the family kind of picked up on it. And that was the thing. But it truly started with watching television. And that was what I discovered. Then Eighth grade English class, I had to write a research paper by hand using books from the library.
Ooh.
Yeah, because it was 90 something.
It was the 90s. Yeah.
But we had to write a research paper about our career choice. And so that's what I wrote about being an attorney. And as I was doing my research, I realized, wait, these are things that I can probably do. Mm-hmm. And that's how we got there. I stuck with it, and it took me a little longer. I went to school in the evening and all of that, but passed the bar, and here we are.
The fact that you saw two black lawyers on television, not necessarily in your life, in your everyday lived experience, but you saw them on television. And that's another big reason why representation matters.
Absolutely.
Because then you knew it was possible.
Absolutely. And fun fact, I actually, 2008 or something, there was an event here in Columbus. It was a campaign event. I happened to be coming from my law school class and saw an email. I had volunteered on a campaign, and I called my friend and was like, Blair Underwood is in Columbus.
What?
And it was the old Buckeye Hall of Fame Cafe, and they had done something over there. So we jumped in the car and flew over there. He was absolutely, I have a picture of her and I with him. He was absolutely on his way out the door. Some like teenager stopped him, and he was talking to this kid, and like the rest of us were kind of like standing there waiting. And he stood there for another like 30 minutes and talked to people. Oh. And so I got to tell him the story of why I was in law school as an evening student at that time. And he was like, that's great. And oh my gosh, you mentioned me in the same sentence with Felicia Rashad. That's awesome. Like, he was more excited about that. Oh. But he was so gracious and kind. And I was just like, I just talked to Blair Underwood.
Right. He's still fine as wine, but that's a whole nother show.
Yeah.
That's interesting. You stole the words right out of my mouth. That's what I was going to bring up, is the Claire Huxtable aspect of it and how much representation does matter.
Yeah.
Just recently, I was reading an article about first female commander of the USS Constitution. Mm-hmm. And, in the comment sections on social media stuff, you hear people like, why can't it just be the person's a commander? Why has it got to be the first or the first woman? Like, because representation matters. You hear this story right here, and that's why it's important, because as a young Black female, I'm sure that was very inspirational, as you were saying, to your overall success now.
Yeah. And how wild is it, though, that it's 2022 and we're still talking about the first woman or the first Black woman or the first Asian person or the first whatever.
That's right.
That's a lot. So that's why we still have to talk about it.
That's why we still have to talk about it, because some of places we haven't even gotten yet. Mm-hmm. That's why we're still talking about first, because we still have not been allowed the opportunity and the access to get to certain places.
Yep.
So that's true talk.
Now, you worked with the U.S. Congresswoman Joyce Beatty. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me what that was like?
So that was an interesting learning experience. What I learned from one thing is that Congress is a very interesting place.
Yes, it is.
Like, it has a very quick pace and a slow pace all at the same time. Mm-hmm. It is very interesting how, like, slow when you have to get 400 some odd people to try to even get close to agreeing to something. And the process of getting people to sign on a bill that you are presenting or those sorts of things, that takes a very long time. Yes. And that's a lot of conversations. Yes. I also learned that people don't understand the government. And so, like, when you try to be helpful, right? But we would get calls about, like, my trash didn't get picked up Wednesday, and I'm like, I'm gonna give you the number that's like the city of Columbus, like, call 311, right? Like, I mean, those are the things, because people just thought, you can help me. I'm like, I can, but I can't. Like, I can't. Right. I don't, like, yes, I work for somebody who's a federally elected representative, right? But I cannot make Columbus come pick up your trash on time. Like, that's not what we do,
right? Yeah.
Which then reminded me, though, that, like, politics is very local.
Yes. Oh, yes.
And so that kind of reignited my passion. Working for a congressperson reignited my passion to remind people about why they need to be engaged in local politics.
Yes.
Because seeing the speed or lack of speed in the way things happen at the federal level, it was me reminding people, hey, you need to vote for your city council people. Yes. You can go to those meetings, right?
Right.
You probably need to figure out what's going on at your state house. It's right downtown.
Right.
Being a lawyer, I have friends who are judges now or who are running for judge. And it's a conversation of, like, if you show up at the courthouse at 9:00, by the time they take that noon recess for lunch, they've completely shifted your life.
Right.
You want to vote for judges.
Right.
So that be like working in the congressional office made me more passionate even still about local politics.
Yeah. And one of the things we find so interesting, obviously, midterms are coming up later this year. Most people skip that altogether, which honestly ends up impacting your local municipalities in your direct life more often than the federal ones. And so I'm always shocked at how many people just don't turn out at all.
It's very interesting. Like, people get very excited about the president because that's the most popular office.
Right.
But they don't do the most work in
Not
the
at all.
executive branch. Like, that's just not how that works. But people
Right.
get very excited about it because it's flashy. And of course, in our country now, it's a celebrity thing.
Right.
When they start talking about actors and stuff running for president, you're like, but
Right.
what do they know how to do?
Right. Exactly. Read a script.
Yeah.
Golf key. I don't know. What
Yeah.
is that all about?
Yeah.
Yeah. But talking about Joyce Beatty, 2 summers ago, 2020, Joyce, as well as several of us, were out protesting in the city of Columbus around the murder of George Floyd. And we were attacked by mace and pepper spray by police officers, and even Joyce Beatty, being a U.S. congressperson, was in the mix of that. So can you talk a little bit about what you were doing that summer and how those events impacted you?
So first, that specific event was very shocking to me when I saw it, because she was also with a commissioner and a city council president.
Yes.
And I was like, even if you don't know these people personally, like, you've seen them enough
Right.
that even with a mask on, you know who they are.
Yes.
One, you shouldn't be spraying anybody in the face
Right.
because they weren't on the sidewalk. But like, really? Like, the person who's the president of the city council who votes for your budget, you
Right.
just sprayed. Sure. But for me, it was a heavy summer, right?
Yeah.
For someone of my age and space and place in life, I am not unfamiliar with the unrest that comes about after police violence, right? I remember Rodney King.
Right.
I remember Malice Green.
Right.
I remember being like super anxious after Sandra Bland was killed.
Yeah.
Like driving down the street and the police were doing shift changes and I saw too many police cars and I almost didn't make it to the gym that day.
Right.
Like those kinds of things. So I remember when I heard about George Floyd, I was intentional about not watching the video.
Yeah.
I can sit here today and tell you I still have not seen that video.
Yeah.
I've seen one photograph and that told me all that I needed to know.
Right.
And I was like, this is too much.
Yeah.
And then I thought about, we had started hearing just before that about Breonna Taylor, even though her incident had happened, and then there's Atiana Jefferson and I mean, just all of these folks.
Yeah.
And so I was exhausted for one. And it was very much I've got nothing left to give. And on top of that, I had already been in my house for 3 months because we were not allowed to go anywhere because of COVID.
Right.
So it was extremely heavy because it's like, I can't, just run up to my mom's house in Toledo and hang out or go grab a drink or something with my friends. I am processing this alone.
Yeah.
Layer on that being an attorney.
Yeah.
So then people have expectations of how things should happen.
Right.
And we are taught the way things should happen based on the law. And that's not what happened.
Not at all.
Like, allegedly, he was passing a counterfeit bill. Okay. The sentencing for a counterfeit bill is not death.
It is not death.
Like, those things on the line. So when you see something like that happening, and then the whole wide world opened up and everybody was like, oh my gosh, this is a thing that happens. Yeah, it is.
Right.
And it has happened for far too long.
So long.
And so trying to explain that to people, I will say, though, one thing that was helpful for me was being able to be in meetings on Zoom where people were asking questions and they were trying to learn. And being able to impact some of my colleagues, because some people learn better when they have a real life example of somebody they know.
Yes.
So being able to say to my colleagues or boss or board or whomever, so think about, I drive an SUV now. You cannot see down into my car like when I drove a sedan. Where am I putting my purse?
Right.
If I'm on my way to the grocery store or on my way out of town and I'm on the interstate or I'm on the street and a police car is behind me too long, I'm starting to calculate, if I get pulled over, how I'm going to explain I have to reach in my purse, in this big old purse, to get my driver's license.
Right.
Then adding to that, oh, by the way, I have a concealed carry license. So now, before legislation changed, I have to disclose that. Like, so I was describing this and someone said to me, I did not realize the mental gymnastics that you have to go to
Honey.
to run errands. And she said, I will never understand it because I am a Caucasian woman.
Right.
She was like, but now I have a better understanding and filter.
That's right.
Because you've told me. So when I hear or see this again, I'm going to use that knowledge.
Yes.
So of all the craziness that came out of that, at least I was able to help some people see something better.
Yeah.
Where I work on my day job, they decided we need to do some education. So I was tasked with developing an entire equity education series.
Love it.
And, colleagues jumped on board. Every phone call I made to ask people to do it, they said yes. So that's been something that we've been able to share in the legal community and beyond.
Love it.
So there were some good things that came out of that very, very terrible, sad, horrific incident.
It's interesting when you're talking about the mental gymnastics you have to go through. I've had the privilege of raising a black child and a white child. And my son, who is white, when he was driving, I didn't go through all the procedures and the process of what you have to do when you get pulled over. My daughter, who is black, I did. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until one day when I got pulled over and I was kind of irritated that I got pulled over and I kind of spouted off. It clicked with me at that moment that this is not the example I need to do because my daughter was in the car with me. And as soon as I got a little bit of attitude, I turned to my daughter and I said, don't you ever do what I just did. Mm-hmm. So I had to reiterate that was wrong. And it's such an interesting perspective. I'm glad you got a chance to share that with your fellow colleagues just to give a different point of view.
Yeah. Interesting point, too, though, is that when I was in high school, I have some relatives who are retired law enforcement, but I was the school police officer student aide my senior year of high school. One, he made me 2 promises. One, if you ever get in trouble, you got 1 phone call to get me because your mother's not going to come get you because she's going to kill you. And the second one was do not choose law enforcement as a career. Those are the 2 things. But there was a time when I got pulled over in high school. My mom was in the car with me. My mother has a visual impairment, so she couldn't see like peripherally, right? And I got pulled over for like having a blown headlight. Well, I'm sorry, my brights were on because I had a blown headlight and I was 17. And so my brain said, well, it's dusk. Turn on the brights because then you'll have 2 headlights instead of 1. It's 17, right? This is your logic.
I still do that. What are you talking about?
Yeah. So I got pulled over. This guy was yelling at me. Like as soon as he got out of the car, he starts yelling at me. And the other officer who was much older kind of came up on the backside of the car. This is what I figured out eventually. This is what they do. Like it wasn't like he was being weird. This is what they do. And so my 17-year-old brain was like, why are you yelling at me? So now I'm in a yelling match with this guy. And he's like, didn't you see me flash my lights at you? And I'm like, well, yeah, but like, what? Like, so my mother's like, stop yelling, stop yelling, stop yelling. Mm-hmm. I'm not stopping yelling because I'm 17.
Right.
I immediately went home and called the officer that I was a student aide for and was like, this guy, and da-da-da-da. And it was like, okay, well, you should never yell. Don't ever do that again. Yeah. But also, let me figure out who this guy was, right? Mm-hmm. You learn when you get older.
Yes, it's so true. Yeah, I definitely was a lot more mouthy in my young age than I was yesterday.
I was going to say.
Yeah, you know me.
I was wondering where you're going with that.
Yeah,
you cleared it up. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. So, we talked about, the heaviness that went on that summer, and then you were able to share at least some education moments for your coworkers. Like, what other things really changed about your life after that summer?
So one thing is that I got more intentional about seeking joy. Like, what are the things that make me feel good? What are the activities or what people can I be around to make me feel good? Yeah. And to make me like really spark that joy because life is short, right? Mm-hmm. The other thing was I got better about boundaries.
Yes.
And like not only making my own, but also being sure that I'm respecting other people's boundaries is kind of a big deal.
Right.
Prioritizing rest. Because that was such a heavy time and it was so much going on and it was like restlessness because even though you're like, I'm working from home, I'm at the house and I don't know what to do though. It's like you were doing too much.
Right.
So trying to get rest, connecting with people, and trying to maintain those connections. And then the podcast was born after that too. Like it was sometime later, but like the podcast came after that too because I thought, how can I help continue to educate people?
Yes.
What does this look like?
Yes. Yeah. I love that too because I think about, just there's such a trope about Black women having to carry the world on their shoulders all the time and we don't always get to do what we want to do. We have to do what we have to do. Mm-hmm. And that rest piece is so lost sometimes. Like, I know I feel tired all the time, and there's so much pressure that we probably feel internally, but it also comes around, you know, in our environments. You know, I know for one, I always feel like when I'm the only Black woman, Black person in a room, I have to feel like I got to be above and beyond all the time, impeccable with what I do, because I believe if I don't succeed, they will never give another person that looks like me a chance. And I carry that every single day.
We don't get to be soft. We don't get to make mistakes. We don't get to show emotion.
No.
We just got to go and do the things, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I'll be honest with you, as a white person, I don't think about that. So I don't speak for all white people, but I don't think about that stuff. If someone screws up, I don't look at that as detriment to me being successful.
It's tough.
It's to quote Kimberly Crenshaw, the brilliant scholar and lawyer.
Yes.
That intersectionality piece, right? Of like
Yes.
the more identities that we present, particularly as Black women, the more challenges we seem to have in spaces, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
you and I as Black heterosexual women, right?
Yes.
Okay, that's two things. But
Right.
I have some friends who are Black queer women.
Yes.
It's a whole other thing,
Right.
right? I have some friends who are Black queer women with some sort of disability, right?
Right.
Then that boom, boom, boom. Like, so it starts to push you
Exactly.
almost further away from what people feel is acceptable or right or whatever. And it's just like, well, no. These are actually attributes. You all are looking
Right.
at these intersectionalities the wrong way.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And you don't let me in my brilliance shine the way I need to. Not like you.
Right.
I'm me.
Right.
Unique. Beautiful. Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. So you talked a little bit about inscribing inclusion and how you kind of brought that together. Like, what kind of things were you hoping to help people get and understand through the podcast?
So it is truly to me an educational thing. It's much like how I decided to be a lawyer. I was sitting on my couch one night and I block out time. Like I try to once a week to do some writing, creative writing, stuff like that. And so I was sitting on my couch and I started writing this plan for a podcast. Because when I tell you I listen to podcasts every day, every day.
Love it.
And so I was like, what am I doing? Here's a wish list of guests. Here's some topics. I keep hearing this commercial about this platform I can use. Let me do a podcast. That's how it truly came about. It was like February 2021. And by the first week of March, I launched.
Love it.
But so it was like, what can I do to help people understand things that they don't understand? And so having conversations with folks like you and Brian or other friends who are scholars or consultants in the space, I was like, let's do that. And then having even very basic things like in June, I did something that I called Lessons of Liberation. And so I did one episode about Juneteenth and an episode about Pride because those are the two things that we celebrate in June.
Absolutely.
And a lot of people talk about, especially Juneteenth, that like in the past couple of years, that has been we got to celebrate Juneteenth. You have no idea what it is.
No idea.
So I wanted to make sure that people understood. And they were like, I don't know, 30-minute episodes, but primers about like, if these are things that you say that you're participating in or that you're trying to promote or observe or whatever, you should know what it is.
Absolutely.
And so there was a whole thing before the federal government made the national holiday that poor old woman in, I think, Oklahoma and Nebraska it was Miss Pearl or something, who had been asking for decades, right? Before that, though, companies were like, we're closing for Juneteenth. And so what does that mean to you? Because you don't even know what the holiday means.
No idea.
I'm waiting very shortly. There's going to be like a mattress sale on Juneteenth or like linens or something. Like it won't be long before it becomes a thing that it's going to be a sale like in the middle of the summer.
Right. That's exactly right.
Oh yeah. But I mean, truly, Inscribing Inclusion, the name came because I absolutely love alliteration. And I had about 3 different options that I wrote down, but like, it's truly just about education. And it is a way, I'm not trying to make anybody necessarily an expert or anything, but I want them to learn something they did not know before.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. That's very similar to why we started too.
Yeah. I think it's great for stories like what you're sharing, because I think a lot of white people like me, I've been called woke and wokester and all this other stuff now, and that's okay. I'll wear it with a badge of honor because I don't want to be the opposite, which means I'm asleep and I'm not paying attention. So I don't want to be that. But I do the same thing on my Facebook page. I'll go back because I'll watch Black creators on TikTok and they'll talk about Black history. I'm like, well, wait a minute, I didn't know that. And then I'll go back and do the research, and then I'll put that on my Facebook page and then educate mostly my white friends that are on my Facebook page and get an interaction going that way. Why I might not get a lot of likes or whatnot on there, when I see them, they always bring it up. So I know people are reading this stuff, but I'm glad that you're doing that, and it gives people like me an opportunity to get some self-awareness and some education in the process.
And that's the fun part too, is that once you learn something, sharing it with somebody else. And I love that it's funny to me because you're using you see these things on TikTok, and we're right at that. Like, I'm on TikTok because I have a cousin who's a comedian, so I got on there to watch him, and then I fell down the rabbit hole, right?
Yes.
But many people in our generation still very much use Facebook.
Yep.
So like, you're like, okay, I see this on TikTok. Let me go do some more research, and now I'm putting it over here on Facebook because if I just reshare this TikTok video, it's not going to resonate with the people I need to talk to,
right?
Because this is not where they are. So being even aware of where to reach the audience is a major thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then after I do each post, I make sure, because there's always skeptics out there, I always make sure I'll put a reference at the bottom of the post so people can, hey, this is actually on history.com, not MSNBC or Fox News, whatever your bias might be.
And the lawyer in me loves that. You would get good points in your paper for properly citing and giving context.
Always cite the source.
That's it.
Always cite the source. So when you're thinking about, we're in 2022 now, which it's still hard for me to believe. We've been almost 2 years to that summer. What kind of things have you seen change for the better? What things have you seen change for the worse? And what things have you seen stay the same? That's very loaded. I know.
That is a loaded question.
It's loaded.
That's
I know.
a lot. So I will say something that I've seen change for the better is that people are paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
And now not everybody that's paying attention is doing something with what they're seeing, right?
Right.
But people are paying attention, and some people are truly trying to educate themselves more, or trying to leverage their privilege, or whatever it is to make a change.
Yep.
So that's something that I'm like, well, I don't know where these people have been for the last several hundred years or even during the course of their lifetimes, but they're paying attention now. And that's something I feel like you can work with a little bit, right? Yep. Things that have gotten worse, though, is while it seems like people are paying attention, it seems like people are even more polarized.
Yes, that's very true.
I don't know if it's because we have more access to each other now.
Yeah.
Like I was texting with one of my cousins earlier, and I'm like, I don't get it. Like, why are people so just like, I was like, because we know it, we can see it more.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a lot easier. It's very interesting to me that like we have more access to information. I grew up working in the library in high school.
Yeah. Same.
And the library was Google before there was Google, right? Like I remember people calling and they would ask the librarian some of the most random questions. I remember being at home and trying to figure out something, and it wasn't in the dictionary or in the encyclopedia, and my mom saying, well, just call the library, right? And then Google came about. And now we have these phones where in a matter of seconds, or we have these smart speakers, or literally in seconds, you can get information, and people are either not accessing it, or they're accessing wrong information,
right?
Or they're only accessing the information that confirms what they already believe.
Correct. Confirmation bias.
Confirmation bias, right?
Everybody loves that.
But it's like, and so then people are digging in and being very much like, there is no space for grace. There is no space for learning.
Yes.
There is none of that. People are just digging in and being like, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. And it's like, well, wait, maybe they don't know any better.
Right.
Or if they do know better, how do you redirect them?
Right.
Or what do you do before you cut them off? Like, or if you cut somebody off or whatever and distance yourself from them because they are wrong and choosing to remain wrong.
Yes.
How are you even handling that?
Right.
So it's like way more divisive.
Yeah.
Things that have stayed the same. That one is hard.
Yeah.
Because there's so much stuff. It's just like, I mean, I think part of the Great Awakening, as I call it, when everybody got all like, oh, something's happening. I think that mostly happened because of COVID.
Yeah.
Because we were at home and you had to see it, right?
Yeah,
Right.
see it, yep.
Right.
COVID has been such a major disruptor. So it's hard to say what's really staying the same, because in the spaces where people are trying to go back to normal or return to pre-COVID, like life is not letting us do that.
It's not.
So
at all.
It's so hard. I mean, and to its credit, even though it is a disaster, like a pandemic is not good, but some of this disruption was helpful because it caused shakeups in spaces where people were refusing to change. And they had all the data, the tools, the technology to do something different, and were not. And then they had to.
Yeah.
I think COVID also exposed a lot of the inequities, like from a socioeconomic standpoint.
Absolutely.
They're like, we'll send all the kids home and they'll use their little laptops and jump in on their lessons. Well, they don't have
Not
internet at
everybody
their
has
house.
that.
Or God forbid.
Or broadband.
Well, it's weird because if you live in Linden,
Yes.
or if you live in somewhere in Ross County, you
Right.
have the same lack of access
Right.
to internet. Like thankfully there's these infrastructure bills and things that are being passed because it just say, well, the kids can just go home, or the number of kids who were not going to school, that meant they were not eating breakfast and lunch.
That is also correct.
Right. And then they
Yes.
couldn't get somewhere to get because COVID had everything all wound up. Or the people who were like, hey, I cannot work from home.
Right.
And I cannot have time off work.
Right.
So who's going to be at home when my kids are supposed to be learning school? Because I've got to go out here and work at one of these restaurants or one of these hotels or gas stations that you all want to be at.
That's right. That's exactly right.
So that the number of inequities that and people are like, we didn't know this was happening. Where have you been?
Like, how did you not know this has been happening? I mean, it's a very telling fact when Germany and China do help ads about how they need to protect American families and kids adopt an American child because they're poor. Like the whole country's poor, not just poor, the whole country. Like that to me was like, wow.
I saw that and I was like, this isn't real.
It's so real.
Yeah, it was wild. It was wild.
I think the perception too, for those of our listeners that don't know, Linden is more of a urban mixed race type community, where Ross County would be more of a probably predominant white community. And I think one of the challenges that is the perception. You have the same inequalities, but one community, Linden, and I see it all the time in our local news, just get beat up.
Yeah.
There's nothing anybody can do right in that community, even though people are trying, where the Ross County community doesn't get much criticism at all. And I think that's another part of the inequalities that go on.
Yeah, it's racial dynamics and language, you know, how people language things when it becomes the black people doing something versus white people doing something. You know, that's very, very apparent. So I know this has been very heavy in a lot of ways, but what are the things that you're hopeful about thinking about this social and political change that we hope is coming about and will stay sustainable change?
So this was something I think that we talked about when you all were on my podcast. And then I happened to sit in a webinar yesterday with Dr. Mark Taylor, who lives in Little Rock, Arkansas. And he presented to us about generational diversity. It was very exciting. And so the thing that stood out to me, though, is that the young people, the Gen Zs, right?
Yes.
Good, bad, or otherwise, they are causing disruption. To the point where people have now even stopped looking at what millennials want, and they're trying to figure out what the Gen, because the Gen Zs are like the millennials are old people now, I guess. So it's hysterical. But
what does that make us?
Listen,
We're really old.
We
are really old.
We're in trouble. But like, they're very much like, this is what I want now.
Yes.
And some of it is kind of misguided and wild. Like, what are you talking about?
Right.
But a lot of it is very much like, I've watched my parents and grandparents work all day and then come home and not have time to talk to me.
Right.
Or wait to take trips until they retire.
Right.
Or go to work sick.
Right.
Or whatever that is, right? And they were like, I don't want to do that.
Right.
And so they are causing that kind of disruption. And I like it.
Yeah.
Because that means that the workplace is shifting. And for those of us who tend to be a little more progressive minded or still maybe a little youthful in our thinking, right? We are also like, yes, young people, I'm coming up that mountain with you. Let's get it. And I have a little more sway than you do. So I'm going to make this happen.
Yes.
I even had one of my coworkers say it to me today. She was sick, has been sick for a couple days, and was like, yeah, I'm going to the office tomorrow. And I was like, if you're sick still tomorrow, please don't go.
Right.
And she was worried about a meeting that she had with someone else. And I was like, I bet you if you tell them that you don't feel good, they will be happy to see you online.
Yes, they sure will.
And she emailed them and was like, I can't do it. I need to do this online. And they were like, yep. And so she said to me, we were having a conversation after the fact, and she goes, I never would have thought before to not just go in there half dead and hacking trying to get this meeting done.
Right.
I never would. She's like, I have internet stuff that we can use Zoom. We can do all these things. She goes, I never would have thought before. It's amazing how my thinking is changing in this time. And I was like,
oh yeah,
I am congratulating you for that. Right.
Yeah.
So the young people are influencing us in those ways.
Absolutely.
So that's certainly something that makes me hopeful. And because of how things happened in 2020, people are getting, I think, more politically curious and more involved.
Yeah.
Even with the despair of like, I'm voting and I'm still seeing these things that look like crazy, right?
Yeah.
But we're seeing more people who are younger saying, I'm not waiting until you tell me I can get into this. I'm coming
That's
in
right.
there now.
That's right.
And I'm going to run for this thing that you tell me I have to be 45 and 60-year-olds to do.
Right.
I'm doing it now at 32, 35, whatever. I'm
Right.
not waiting for you.
Right.
And I like that too, because why should you have to wait
Right.
until somebody says that you're a certain age or something? That doesn't
Right.
necessarily mean that you know what you're doing just because you're older.
Truth, honey.
The other thing is I think people are getting more intentional about, you don't want to work until you die.
No.
So how are you preparing the next generation to start doing this stuff now?
Absolutely.
How are you, if you're that concerned about it, start training your successor
Yes.
and pass the baton and pull them
Yes.
in on stuff. Don't wait. Even at 42, I'm like, you're 27. What are you doing?
Right.
You want to talk to me about something? Great. Let's sit down and talk.
Yes.
I'm not doing this forever.
Exactly.
I mean, I will always be doing this because I can't help it. It's part of my life.
Right.
But like also, I'm not doing this forever.
That's
So-
right. Or you can do it on your own terms or from
Exactly.
some non-extradition island somewhere.
You already understand.
Girl,
She's already tried.
you better talk
She's
about
been
it.
staking out islands all across the world.
So
Literally
listen,
have.
you know
I
people that
literally
wait
have.
until they retire to be snowbirds?
You
I was like, how can I make this a thing soon?
girl. I was teasing with one of my friends because she's 54 and she was like, well, if I plan right, I may be able to get it about like 61, 62. I said, girl, I'm trying to do 51.
Listen.
And I'm 49, folks, just so you know.
Listen.
I'm trying to do 51.
Accelerate it.
Honey.
But yeah, I mean, those are things making hopeful. People are more aware and they're learning more and they're trying to get
Yeah.
engaged more,
Yeah.
whatever that looks like. And for some folks, it means going through the typical establishment and becoming a part of that. For other folks, it
Yes.
means throwing rocks and breaking windows and turning
Yes.
everything on its head.
That's right.
And I think there's space for all of it.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Totally agree with you on that. So if you're thinking about people just wanting to get involved or think about how to move forward from this point, like what is one piece of advice that you would give folks?
So I am a nerd,
Yes.
a self-professed nerd.
Yes.
And so I guess there's a couple things. One is that I would tell people to learn as much as you can.
Mm-hmm.
And I repeat this so much wherever I'm at work or wherever I am. I repeat so much about it's easy to learn about other people if you really try.
Yeah.
And you don't have to go like really deep. It's not hard. Like
Right.
we have libraries, we have streaming services, we have access to all this media all the time.
Yes.
So if you want to learn about somebody and you love to read, just start picking up different books.
Yes.
If you're a person that likes to watch movies, scroll lower on that menu on your streaming service,
Yes.
and they have categories of like movies directed by women,
Mm-hmm.
movies about the Asian American experience,
Mm-hmm.
movies about whatever, right?
Right.
Okay, so do that if you like to do movies. If you like to be out and about amongst people, especially if you live in a state like Ohio, go
Yes.
to the festival in the summer.
Absolutely.
There's a festival for everything. If it's strawberries, if it's whatever. I grew
Paws.
I grew up in Toledo, and there's
Right.
the Polish festival,
Yes.
and the German festival, and just
The
go
Italian fairs, Irish
eat some
festival,
food and learn
everything.
about stuff, right?
Absolutely.
So it's a very easy entry, and I say to make it even better, look for the books, the movies, the podcasts that are produced or written by the people that you're trying to learn about.
Yeah.
Like I could tell you about LGBTQ life.
Mm-hmm.
I am not a part of that community.
Right.
I would instead point you toward someone who is and
Right.
say, go read this book, go watch this documentary.
Absolutely.
There was one that was out, I think last summer. I can't remember if it was on like Discovery Channel or Amazon Prime or something, but it was basically like about pride through the decades.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is good, right?
Right.
I would point somebody to that because
Right.
that was produced for just that reason.
Right.
Or if you want to learn about, Black women, gosh, you can go read a book by Maya Angelou.
Right.
Or you can go read a book by, anybody recent. Like,
Right.
I think, I'm trying to think, Tiffany Cross has a book coming
Yeah.
out. And some, all these different
Yeah.
people. They're just like, no,
Right.
not Tiffany Cross, Laura Coates, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
All on TV. But I mean, just you can do this, though. This is very simple.
Right.
The other thing that I would remind people, I guess, is as you're on this journey and you're trying to learn more and do more and move forward, you have to have grace
Mm.
and compassion.
Mm.
You have to be honest. You have to be clear.
Yeah.
And I say you have to use deliberate speed. So there was I think it was Brown v. Board, when they were talking about desegregating schools. And the Supreme Court wrote that it should be done with all deliberate speed. And I think that they meant pretty quick. But when I think about deliberate, I think that those are like very specific actions that you're taking.
Right.
And you're taking your time. You're not necessarily not moving or going super slow.
Right.
But you're being very clear and deliberate in your steps. So when I say, I just, ripped it from the court, it's fine. They'll be okay. It's been there a long time. When I say with all deliberate speed, I mean, do it, keep moving forward, don't stop moving, but be very clear and precise about what you're doing. Right? Yeah. So if you're trying to learn something, commit to learning it. If you're trying to make sure that you are better about how you talk to people or how you act around people, what does that mean? That means not editing yourself, but carefully choosing your words. Yeah. Learning different words. Yeah. Learning to make space for folks. Yeah. Like being intentional.
Love it. Intentionality. It's beautiful. It's good stuff. It's good stuff. So, Jocelyn, if people want to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
So there's a couple of ways. One, you can follow me on Twitter. That's Jocy JD, JOCYJD. You will get hot takes about political things. I will probably be watching a sports event and share something about that or some randomness. If you want like actually serious things, Inscribing Pod is my Twitter handle for the podcast. You can also email me at inscribinginclusion@gmail.com, or you can follow the podcast on Instagram. It's Inscribing Inclusion on Instagram as well.
Perfect.
Awesome.
We will link all of those things to the podcast in the notes.
That's where I do my best work, behind the scenes.
Oh, that's what you say. 14 years together, y'all. 14 years. Hopefully
and
still going strong.
Yes.
Strong coffee, strong booze. Strong. Very strong. Well, Jocelyn, we so appreciate you coming and being a part of the podcast today. So many beautiful nuggets of inspiration that you've shared with us, and we just appreciate you and who you are and what you're doing for this movement.
Doing great work.
Thank you both so much for having me. I love being beside you in this journey as we are all trying to educate people and making the world a little bit better place.
And if you want to get in touch with us, you can reach out at enbwpodcast@gmail.com or on our Meta, also known as Facebook page, Everything's Not Black and White. And so we appreciate our wonderful guest, Jocelyn Marie Armstrong, Esquire, for joining us today. And we will see y'all next time.
See you later.
Bye.